Well, folks, without further ado, I'm going to start today, and others will come and join us as they can. And beginning with that wonderful tikanga, the sort of formal way of centering ourselves in that tangata whenua have generously shared with us, and that many of us have learned to appreciate. So, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. And we acknowledge a whole lot of important features and factors in our lives. So, ki te atua, tēnā koe, those of us who uh, believe in a God, or those of us that don't. Everyone is welcome, and we acknowledge the spiritual powers over us all. Kia papatua nuku, tēnā koe, to this earth, the mother of us all. And ki te mana whenua, the people of the land wherever you are. And for me here, that's Nai Tuahuriri, a runanga that is mana whenua for Otatahi Christchurch. But for all of you, wherever you are, to the mana whenua, tēnā koutou. I te hunga mate, to our dead. Haere, haere, haere. And today in particular, we think of them because we are thinking about the end of life and ways that we can help. Ki te hunga mate wareware, tēnā koe, to people living with dementia, and ki te whānau mate wareware, to the families who are living together with a person with dementia, and ki te kaimahi mate wareware, to all of us, the workers that aim to help. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. As for me, no Ingarani Kotirana me Norway, Oku Tipuna, so I trace my ancestry back to Norway and Scotland and also England. E mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehe o Otatahi e noho nei o. And I recognize the spiritual and the traditional landmarks of Otatahi where I live. Ko ngā kohatu whakareka o tamatea pokai whenua, ngā maunga, te rūnei taku nākau. So it's the Port Hills that speak to my heart here, the Port Hills of Christchurch. Ko whakarapō te moana, e mahia nei aku mā harahara. It's the wonderful whakarapō, the Littleton Harbour, is what brings me peace. It's my special place. Ko Opawaho te awa, e kawe ana I aku whakairo. The little river, but the river that nonetheless carries my thoughts, is the Opawaho, the Heathcote River, here in Christchurch. Ko wild duck te waka. So the Croucher family arrived in this country on the wild duck, which sailed from London to Auckland and Wellington 8 or 9 times in the 19th century. Kei te noho o I Otatahi, so Christchurch is where I live, and ko Croucher te whānau, ko Matthew toko ingoa. He takata haora hinanaro mō nau kaumatua. So I'm a psychiatrist of old age based here, and on behalf of the Dementia Leadership and Advisory Group, te whakaruruha mō te mate wareware, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I'd like to share with you now a karakia to centre us in, a karakia that's important because it speaks to us not only of the creation of our world and how we all came to being, but is about how from a spark comes the desire to learn, and from that desire to learn comes our understanding. And I particularly like the way that this is being put together by the dude who's produced No Frills Te Reo Māori, a wonderful YouTube channel if you're interested. So I'll just share that karakia and then we will begin. Take care. And without further ado, may I hand over to my colleague, Susan.
Nā koutou. So I tipu ake au ki mura hiku, ko G te whānau, ko Susan toka ingoa. So my name's Susan G and I hail from the far south. Ko tēnei taku mihi ngā tangata whenua o te rohi nei, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. So my acknowledgement to the tangata whenua and a very, very warm welcome to you all. So Bevan, are you okay with putting the PowerPoint up for So, the Dementia Matiwari Action Plan has in it a commitment to building capability and capacity to better assist people who are dying with Dementia Matiwari. And as a Dementia Matiwari network, we've also identified a priority for us that we want to develop an information sharing culture. So it's with very great pleasure that we can bring these two things together to bring this webinar to you today. So this work stems from a very large team from down here in the South Island. And you'll only see some of these people on the screen today, but we want to acknowledge them all. And we especially want to acknowledge the heart and the energy at the centre of this project, the absolutely amazing Jane Large. Now, one of the things that I really like about this project, which stemmed from the South Island Alliance of District Health Boards, is that it started off by listening, always a great place to start. And so they engaged with staff across aged residential care, Māori health, home care, mental health, palliative health care, and they did surveys, they did focus groups, they did working groups. And what they heard in particular were three challenges. A lack of advanced care plans when residents came into aged residential care. It could be difficult to coordinate across services at the end of life. And for some aged residential care teams, they weren't feeling confident about creating an individualised care plan for the end of life. So what the group did was they actually identified three existing tools that, when used routinely, could help to address these core challenges. So in short, three tools that are really what we'll be hearing about today. We will be hearing about the importance of talking early on in the relationship and early on in the journey with Dementia Matiwari with shared goals of care conversations. We'll be hearing about the importance of teamwork and multi-service, multidisciplinary team meetings. And we will be hearing about te ara whakapiri, guidance for those very last days of life. Now, there's going to be a lot of information coming today, and so we have a website for these three tools. You can see the link there. You'll find that there are a booklet for each of these tools that provides an introduction from the project team. The videos from today will be going up on that website, and you'll also find links to other helpful resources. So as Matthew has said, it's a very special topic, and we want to take a moment to acknowledge that we all come in today as human beings, and we acknowledge the people in our lives that have died, they're a part of us, and they are a part of why we are here today with a commitment to dignified death. And we want to thank you for the love that you bring to this space and to those that you support. He tonga ronganui, te aroha ki te tangata. Your love and compassion to others is a precious treasure. So I'm going to hand over now to Carol.
Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. Ko toko ingoa Carol Kerr, noho ahau e whakatū te Waipounamu. My name is Carol Kerr and I live in Nelson, South Island. This is if you'll bear with us, this is a tribute to our friend and colleague, Carla Arkless. Carla, who is a nurse practitioner, our friend and colleague, died from cancer on the 6th of October 2023, just last week. Many of you will know Carla through all the advanced care planning work she has completed in New Zealand over the last 12 years. She was a founding member of the New Zealand Advanced Care Planning Cooperative and led a lot of the advanced care planning education and training development. Many of you will have been taught by her or seen her on demonstration videos. Carla was very involved with the development of shared goals of care, and you will see her on the video for the aged residential care shared goals of care that was made during the 2020 lockdown. She embedded advanced care planning processes in Nelson, Tasman, and continued to work part-time with her ACP Advanced Care Planning team at Te Tahu Hauora Health and Quality Safety Commission until she went overseas in December 2021 to cycle around most of the world, which she accomplished. Carla and Margaret O'Connor developed and implemented the first pilot of multi-service MDT approach in aged residential care in 2013, a decade ago. The outcome was so successful that the pilot was embedded as routine practice. We felt very privileged to have Carla join the Health of Older People Alliance team during this work, helping to develop the surveys, run the focus groups, and arrive at the 3 tools to support our clients, whānau, and staff. Carla, you're an amazing woman, and we owe you so much. Thank you for your education, patience, commitment, and contribution, impacting on many lives across the New Zealand health system. Kia ora hareri e ki tōna, moina roa. She has gone to her eternal rest. Araha nui Carla. Thank you, everyone. Right, I'm introducing the first part of this session around the 3 tools today, and this is the person-centered care part of it. Person-centered care is the goal we want to achieve throughout the journey for a person living with dementia, Mati Wareware. The more that we know about a person's life, their likes and dislikes, family whānau, pets, music, travel, the more we can support them. The journey can be long for some people, and there's a term to describe that, which is chronic sorrow, the process of losing part of the person over a long time, grief without a person dying. We may not always recognize when some of the final stages of a person's life start happening: weight loss, sleeping more, increased confusion. The recognition is key for a well-planned end-of-life care. The 3 tools we are going to present will provide a comprehensive approach to care. These are shared goals of care, multi-service team meetings, and te ara whakapiri. Throughout this process, we have worked on trying to make a difference. Process includes the person and their whānau in the centre of the discussion. We have included aged residential care and many other health professionals, all who are working to care for a person at the end of their life and reduce distress. One of the other differences we're trying to make is preventing transfer to public hospital, which can be distressing for family and the person concerned. And we want to keep family and whānau as well informed as possible in the care of their older person living with dementia Mate Wareware. As Susan said, we did a lot of groups, surveys, focus groups, and this work has taken over 2 years to complete. We hope you find it useful, and I'll now hand over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko kingitanga kotahi, ko polono o ko whakapaparanga mai. Ko otatahi toku whenua tupu. Ko hawara, ko hekateri o kukainga, no Aotearoa ahau. Kia motu ka ati rahi, ahau e noho ana anaenei. He kai whakahaere ko papa matua ahau, o te tima to tātou reo o, e te tahuha ora, ko Jane Goodwin ahau. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, my name is Jane Goodwin and it's a privilege and pleasure to get to lead the session on shared goals of care with you today in this webinar. Shared goals of care is the first tool that's included in this package. A little bit of background about me. I'm a nurse. I worked in the acute setting across New Zealand and the UK for 15 years before taking up a role as the Advanced Care Planning Facilitator in Waitaha, Canterbury, about 13 years ago now, gosh, making me feel old. For the last 10 years, I've worked alongside the wonderful Carla Arkless to develop and lead the National Advanced Care Planning training for Te Tahuha Ora, the Health Quality and Safety Commission. We've also worked to support districts with their own implementation of advanced care planning and more recently shared goals of care. For the last 2 years, I've been working predominantly for the Commission, supporting other districts with their training as well as providing implementation expertise to the national team. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be sharing the work that we've been doing at Te Tahuha Ora that fits so beautifully with the mahi that's happening in this space with you all today. So, what is shared goals of care? Shared goals of care are when the person, clinicians, family and whānau explore the person's values and the care and treatment options that are available. And they agree a goal of care for the time, that episode of care, and if that person was to deteriorate. I like to think about shared goals of care as targeted advanced care planning. It's an opportunity to hear from the person and their whānau about what matters to them and use this alongside an understanding of what's happening with the person's health and their medical condition, and to agree a goal of care if that person's condition is to deteriorate. It's a two-part process. The conversation is the first part, to understand who the person is and what matters to them and their whānau, and a decision as to the appropriate goal of care and treatment escalation if the person was to become more unwell. There may be many opportunities across a person's lifetime to have these conversations and contribute to the shared goals of care mahi. Each shared goals of care conversation contributes to their person's advanced care planning journey by encouraging them to consider what matters to them and what is important if things were to change with their health. It's a concept being implemented across the motu for patients entering the acute hospital environments, and in the constructs of what we're doing here, it's also gaining traction in the aged care sector. In the acute environment, the episode of care is generally considered the hospital admission. In the case of a person entering residential care, the episode of care is seen as the period of time that person is living in the facility. So why do we think shared goals of care? Well, it helps to ensure appropriate and necessary care through to the end of life that reflects the person's values, wishes, and preferences. It also helps to strengthen the person-centred dementia Mate Wareware care through to the end of life. Each conversation is unique and each decision is nuanced as each person in whānau will have a different life journey and different care priorities and have different underlying health conditions. Shared goals of care can be applied across a person's lifetime, and unlike the advanced care plan, can be developed and used to support a person who no longer has capacity to make their own healthcare decisions, which is why it's such a valuable tool in the dementia space. So when should we think shared goals of care? Across all our settings, we encourage shared goals of care conversations to happen as close to the admission as possible. Ideally, they should happen before a crisis or imminent end of life. Shared goals of care conversations might be standalone if the person hasn't had a lot of contact with the health system previously, or they may be ongoing and build on previous discussions or decisions that have happened. The opportunity to build on conversations over a period of time is particularly relevant in the aged care environment. A significant change in the person's condition or a routine review are all opportunities to revisit shared goals of care and ensure that everyone is still on the same page about what the goals of care are for the resident. So how do we do this? Well, shared goals of care is generally facilitated by the appropriate clinician or clinicians. We want to be doing it making sure that the person's wishes are heard and that they have the people they want with them. Ideally, we'll also be making sure that if there's an activated enduring power of attorney, they are very much part of that process. We need to do it with cultural safety in a private and dignified environment and with clear documentation. So essentially, shared goals of care has 3 sort of steps as part of the process. And the first is around preparation. Preparation is predominantly something that the responsibility for it predominantly sits with the healthcare team. It's about preparing yourself, the team, the resident and their whānau for the conversation. For yourself, it's about making sure you've considered your own implicit biases. It's about making sure that the right people have been asked to attend the kōrero, and that they know what the conversation is going to be about. So it's not sprung on them, it's not a sudden surprise that these discussions are happening. They've had time to think about and prepare. You want to be thinking about what your team and you consider might be happening with that resident's health conditions, what it might mean for them day to day, but also what it might mean if they deteriorate. It might also include thinking about what types of treatments would or wouldn't be appropriate given that person's underlying conditions and if they would be beneficial or not. It's an opportunity to think about who's going to lead the discussion and how you're going to approach the conversation. And in that preparation phase, you're also wanting to maybe think about what conversation structure you're going to use and how you're going to ensure that we're optimizing a supported decision-making approach for the resident. So Carol alluded to the supported decision-making earlier, and there are 5 steps that are part of this. You can look at this in more detail in the workbook, but essentially it's about inclusion, making sure that resident is involved as much as they are able and are willing to be, that we understand about the things that are important to them, which the shared goals of care process innately is doing, that we're respecting that person's rights to have the people that they want with them, and that these discussions are safe and held with dignity at a pace that works for them, and that we recognise that each day might be different for somebody living with dementia. There may be days that they're more able to participate than others, and we need to adjust and support as we're able through that process. So, second step is around the kōrero, the discussion. The discussion includes asking the person their understanding of what the current condition is and what might lie ahead. It might also be asking the whānau if the resident doesn't have capacity to be sharing all of this information. Asking about how much information the residents and the whānau would like about what's happening. Share your understanding of their current condition and what may lay ahead. And explore their values, what's important to them, including their current priorities, their hopes, their worries, what helps them through tough times, and what they might be willing to go through for the opportunity of more time. Now, the shared goals of care document, which you'll see is 2-sided. There's one side here. It has all these prompts on it to help lead you through that process and make it as simple as possible. You might choose to use a tool like the Serious Illness Conversation Guide to structure and support the conversation. And this has been sort of inbuilt into the process with the form, the way the questions are prompted. To learn more about the Serious Illness Conversation Guide and to see Carla demonstrating it being used to support an ARC shared goals of care discussion, there is a link in the resources, and you can also access this from the Advanced Care Planning website. Again, the link to that is in the resource pack that you can access through the site. In a dementia context, discussions should include the resident as much as is possible. However, we recognise that there are some instances where these conversations may need to be with the whānau without the resident being present. In these situations, it's important for us to be thinking about making sure we're asking whānau for what they think the resident would want, rather than what they want for the resident. So there's a nuance there, and we're really wanting to focus on what they understand the resident would want in this situation. Okay, and the final step in the shared goals of care approach is around decision and the documentation of the discussion and decision, so that people can see what has happened, the process that has gone on to reach this point. So on our shared goals of care form, this is the second side of it, you'll see there are 4 decisions that people can choose from in terms of what our goal of care is for this person. Now, these are clinical decisions. These will be made off the back of the kōrero we've had with the resident and whānau, and with the understanding that the clinical team has about what is happening for that person's health. So option A is that the goal of care is restorative. Treatment aims to restore health status to the best possible. Essentially, option A is the full shebang. We're throwing the kitchen sink at this person, we're escalating them to hospital if we cannot provide treatment on site. So we're doing all we can to optimise their health and keep them as well as possible in that space. Option B is that the goal of care is restorative. Treatment is aiming to prolong life and enhance its quality. Essentially, it is active treatment with all appropriate medically indicated interventions for that resident, but without CPR. Now, CPR may not be administered because the person may have made a decision themselves that they do not want it, either during this process if they still have capacity to make that call, or previously in an advance directive. Or it may be that CPR is not medically indicated for that person. CPR is predominantly only effective if it's being used to restart the heart from some sudden health event. If the reason the heart is stopping is because it's the end of that person's body's dying process, then CPR won't be effective and it shouldn't be used in this situation. Option C, which is one we see used a lot in these kind of contexts, is the goal of care is to improve quality of life. This is about active care on site. The aim is to slow decline and enhance quality of life. In most situations, a resident whose goals of care is C would not be for CPR and would not routinely be transferred to hospital unless comfort cannot be maintained at the facility or transfer is advised by the general practitioner or nurse practitioner. The final goal you can choose from is goal D, which is comfort whilst dying. Treatment aims to optimise comfort rather than attempting to prolong life. If residents are in their last days of life, there is a prompt to initiate te ara whakapiri. Residents who have goal D would not have CPR attempted and would not be transferred to an acute hospital unless there were exceptional circumstances. So it's really important to remember that when we're thinking goals of care, the actual onus or decision making on what the goal of care is comes or sits with the senior clinician, usually the GP or nurse practitioner. There may be instances where a resident or whānau is advocating for much more active treatment than is medically indicated. In these situations, the decision is ultimately a medical one about what's medically appropriate for that person. While the resident and whānau may not agree with this decision, shared goals of care approach and process provides a clear process for everyone to share their thoughts, to be given an opportunity to understand the expected disease trajectory, and for any divergence in thoughts or opinions to be documented so that they're transparent. People can see the conversations, they can see that they've been heard and understood, and that everybody knows that the different places people might be sitting in that decision process. Shared goals of care is a really powerful tool. It's a powerful process that brings benefit to everybody involved. We're now going to have the opportunity to see or hear from Jean, who is a manager at one of our facilities here in Waitaha, Canterbury, and she's going to share with us her experience of shared goals of care and the value it's brought for their residents, their staff, and the team involved.
So I first heard of the shared goals of care sometime June of 2020. It was actually Catherine Palmer, nurse mode, so that was more or less COVID times, right? So she just emailed it to us and said, here's a link of shared goals of care. You may be familiar with advanced care planning, blah, blah, blah. And here are the fact sheets. So I had a look at it and I said, this is a condensed and concise approach, until eventually I spoke to our GM and I said, I think we can get traction with this if we make this a policy. So we made it our policy in June of 2021 that it will become an official document together with the consents when the patient is being admitted. And it's been amazing. So as of now, all our residents have shared goals of care document. We usually would start a conversation by, have you got a will? Because a lot of people are very familiar with wills, you know? A lot of them are not even familiar with enduring power of attorney, some of them. But the wills is a layman's term. So we always say it, it's a will. So what do you understand about will? You know, it's where I write down what I want, you know, this furniture would go to this and so. So it's the same. We use it as the will or as an instruction of what you want to happen when you can't say it anymore. So that's just how we introduce it. And that's easy because it's layman. Everyone understands it. Even people with dementia would understand. As much as possible, we try to involve the resident being there, but we always make sure that there's the enduring power of attorney, of course, ideally, yes. But also, we also want to involve not just the inactive EPOA, but what the resident or who the resident feels is their next of kin or the support person. Because it could be the inactive EPOA of a daughter who's in Australia, but they have a very close friend who knows everything about them next door. So we involve that person in the conversation and we document that. And we simplify the terminologies. Like, for example, we would say, Sue, should you become unwell, would you like us to take you to the hospital, or would you like the nurses here to take care of you, with a big smile? And they say, of course you will take care of me, dear. So yeah, because often it is really, really nerve-wracking for them, even an ambulance trip. Even the appointments, it's hard, and that's why we always want to make sure that we have staff to accompany them or a family member to accompany them, because it's hard. It's a change in the environment, even the lighting, you know, the smell of the environment, and any change can be quite disruptive for them. So we make sure that it's something familiar, and with that discussion, we make it light and easy, so it's not too heavy as well, you're going to die. So the wordings would be very, very different, but as I've said, it's the involvement of those people around them that would make it a bit lighter, and the familiar staff that goes with it. And the good thing about shared goals of care is it's nurse-led. So that means the conversation is led by familiar people whom they have already trusted, or they sort of like think, oh, yep, these are the people that would take care of me. They feel that there's continuity there. But what we have assured them also is that this is a living document. That means it can change, it can be reviewed. So we assure them that. And should your health status change, we will have another discussion. And at the end of the day, yes, we're documenting your wishes, but we want to let you know also that when crisis comes, when health crisis comes, we will use our facility policies and at the same time the clinical judgment of the clinicians that would be taking care of you, primarily the registered nurses and the doctors. And we might be recommending other treatment options than what you have documented. We respect that this is your choice now. It may change. And they're quite accepting of that, yeah. And even the doctors. So what we do in our policy, should the resident or the family choose restorative for CPR, we get the doctor. So we get the doctor involved in that one. Would the doctor agree to this, or would the doctor say, no, not medically indicated? So we have about 50% that the doctor would say not medically indicated, and then we go back to the family and say, and then they accept it now, especially if it's coming from the doctor. It has helped us a lot in terms of reducing acute, unnecessary acute, hospitalizations, because the conversation's already there. We just say, remember we had this conversation, and I think now is the time that we do the comfort cares. We can provide this, so it's more of what we can and the support that we have from the palliative care team and the GPs as well. Our GPs have been very amazing. And also, as the practitioner, it will actually make us grow a lot. It would make you be in touch with your own. I think, especially when we're talking about deaths, it's hard to make that discussion when you are not comfortable talking about it as a person. So I think you can self-reflect on where you stand about these topics. And the more you are in touch with your own personal thoughts about that, the easier it is to convey this and deliver the conversation. So I suppose it's growth for the practitioner as well, at the same time helping the families and the residents.
So thank you so much, Jean, for sharing your experience of Shared Goals of Care and what it's meant for you at your facility. I think there's some really, really key points that she shares in that space about the value it brings for the residents, that opportunity for everybody, whānau, resident, and the healthcare team to be thinking on that same page and having had that opportunity to do that preparatory thinking. So it's not in the crisis we're making these decisions. We've had some of those discussions in advance. We've done some of the thinking, and now we can still discuss where things are up to now and how this sits, but we've done some of that background work. So it's not a sudden first time up thinking. One of the other things we've heard from some of the facilities that have been using Shared Goals of Care in this space a lot is the difference it's made around complaints after a person has died from whānau as well. Because people are feeling that they've been brought along for that journey. They have more of an understanding of what's happening on that trajectory for somebody. And there's less sort of sense of like, why haven't they done things? Why isn't that happening? Those discussions have happened in advance, which has been very valuable and useful. So as with all of the sessions today, the information, we've got our whole booklet around the Shared Goals of Care portion of this that's available on the website, and the links which will be part of this process. And we'll also have links to it from the Advanced Care Planning website as well. So definitely somewhere to access and use if you want to. And as part of that, there's also demonstrations around the kōrero with whānau and Shared Goals of Care space, how you might fill in a form off the back of those discussions you've had. So a real opportunity to see it in action and how it works. So thank you so much for your time today. I understand there might be an opportunity for some questions now, and someone's going to be letting me know which questions are coming from the floor, and I will do my best to answer them for you. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora, Jane. Thank you very much for guiding us through the first of the 3 tools for end of life with dementia. Jane, one of the first questions that's come in the comments so far is the focus of your talk has very much been on the aged residential care setting, and that's a very important setting to get this right. But it seems as though these conversations would be really applicable in other settings as well. Can you just speak a little bit about where that's up to and how confident our kaimahi listening in today can feel to apply this thinking in other settings apart from aged residential care?
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, so I guess Shared Goals of Care has a construct around we need to know an episode of care because we're sometimes making decisions in advance for that person. So predominantly it sits in the current environment within either the acute environment, as I said, when someone's admitted to hospital, that is the defined episode of care, or in our aged residential care environment, where our episode of care is when that person is living in that facility. The complexity about using Shared Goals of Care as a construct to make advanced decision making in the community is we need to be very sure what that episode of care looks like. And while the goals of care may be consistent across those time in terms of the basic themes, when you look at the Shared Goals of Care form for hospital compared with the Shared Goals of Care form for ARC, the escalation processes are different because what you might do for someone that's deteriorating with a goal of A in hospital, that might be, pushing the clinical emergency button, the Met call, having them looked at by the intensive care team transferred to ICU might be very different than what that looks like in an ARC environment, where it might be thinking about getting them actively reviewed by the clinical team, thinking about escalation to hospital. So they're different in different contexts. And that's some of the complexity with shared goals of care as a advanced decision in the community. What that escalation might look like depends on the setting that person is in and the context of their illness. Now, that's the decision itself. The kōrero, the conversation, the discussion with the person, often using the serious illness conversation guide framework, can happen across the continuum. There is no restriction on when we can be having these conversations. The complexity in the community environment at the moment is making a specific shared goals of care decision on a form. There is plans to do some work in that space for specific areas, particularly maybe initially looking at people that are an episode of care being maybe their palliative journey with a certain condition, or an episode of care being the time that they're in a dialysis unit or when they're having transfusion therapy. So we'll need to be still quite specific. Legally, we can't have a blanket shared goals of care decision that applies to everything, because we need to have some nuances around, is it medically appropriate for this situation? So, but I encourage everybody to continue thinking these conversations, because they are applicable across the board. They are part of that advanced care planning, kōrero, that journey, that building on our understanding of what matters to that person in whānau, what they would want if things change for them. And that helps guide us to make those clinical decisions as we need to, as things change for people, whether that's in the community or in the acute or in the aged residential care sector.
Thank you, Jane. So the part of the package of the shared goals of care training within the 3 tools, that is the serious conversation guide, is immediately applicable everywhere and will just help us all. But the specific documentation, there are issues about that being applied everywhere, but that won't stop us having really important conversations. Tell me a little bit about how you
prepare someone, if they're going to then have someone having one of these shared goals of care discussions as they enter the acute setting or come into ARC, having done some of that preparatory thinking really helps them in that space. Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. How would you see this dovetailing in with that separate document or a conversation that people may have had, the advanced care planning conversation that, you know, ideally all of us and all of our patients would have had at some point? How would you comment on how those two mesh in with each other?
I always think of advanced care planning as the umbrella term. So advanced care planning is anything we are doing that is giving people that opportunity to think about, talk about, discuss, contemplate what matters to them and what they might want if their health was to change in the future. Now, there's a number of tools and points in a person's life journey where they might think about this more. The advanced care plan is often something that people often develop in the community settings. They often do that with their general practice teams. Some may do it in other environments, but it's often a bit of a combination of time, thought, discussion to capture in their plan. Shared goals of care is still advanced care planning. It's just more targeted for that episode of care. If someone has previously done an advanced care plan, they've done a lot of that thinking already, and we should be using that to inform what we're talking to them about in terms of the shared goals of care discussion for that time. So it builds on that process. But I guess the beauty of shared goals of care, if someone hasn't had these kōrero in the past, they haven't done any of that advanced care planning thinking, this is our chance to use it. It's a tool that adds to the benefits of advanced care planning. It's another way that we can hear what matters to that person. It's another facet of advanced care planning, and it helps build on that. So we see a number of people that have an advanced care plan. They've had several admissions into hospital where they've done some shared goals of care discussions and made decisions in those spaces. They may have reviewed their advanced care plan and changed it off the back of where things are up to now, all those discussions they've had. And then they might continue with both shared goals of care and an advanced care plan in the aged residential care environment, if that's relevant for them. Or if they've lost capacity to be updating their advanced care plan, the shared goals of care kind of picks up that slack and helps to continue that forward with them to their ability to contribute with the things they've told us in the past matter to them in their plan or previous discussions, and what the whānau might be sharing with us now as well.
Thank you. even in my own mind, I feel much clearer just from the conversation already today about the difference between the conversations that help us to start to think ahead and the documentation of what are you and I agreeing for this episode of care where we're heading towards, cure or helping me to make the best I can or what, it's that's very clearly explained. One of the questions that's come up is to focus on the specific difficulties that can arise where that there's a lot of focus on CPR or not CPR, and the medical advice is that actually that's not a treatment that should be offered in this situation because it would harm and not help. But that is not necessarily where the person themselves or their family are at. You've already talked about how just the conversation is important because it begins to help people to wrestle with these ideas. Any other comments about how that can be managed within this process, and in particular how this can be properly documented in the Shared Goals of Care document if we haven't quite arrived there yet, where we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, we're on that process?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I think one of the really important things to understand from a legal construct in the New Zealand context, a decision as to whether to administer CPR or not to someone is essentially a medical decision in the constructs of this. So even if family or whānau or the resident is incredibly keen and very much wants it, if it's not medically indicated, we are not required to do it because we have an obligation to not cause harm. CPR causes harm. It's not an inconsequential intervention. And if it's not going to add benefit, we are not required to do it. As you say, the complexity is where people are wanting something that we know isn't medically indicated. So the Shared Goals of Care process, that opportunity to have this korero, as you say, helps to have that discussion, helps to get people thinking about where this might sit. We would be documenting absolutely if there's divergence of thinking. The family, the resident is still very keen for this. It isn't medically indicated. It is not something we're going to do, but we have talked to them about everything we will do to be supporting them on this journey. We may do a whole lot of other things. So as Jean talked about in her video, it's about focusing on the things we can do, not the thing that we're not going to do often as well, because CPR it has so much focus, but it's actually such a small part of that journey. And the opportunity to have someone dying with the people they love around them in an environment that's comfortable without people jumping on their chests or shocking them or moving them to a different location, it's a very different construct about what that might look like. So sometimes we often hear people saying that they want to, die with their loved ones with them. They want all these things to happen. And then the next breath they say, but I still want CPR. And sometimes that's a real opportunity for us to talk about the fact that CPR wouldn't enable some of those things to happen, as well as the fact that CPR only has benefit in certain situations. And on their journey of health, it wouldn't have a benefit if their heart was to stop. There's actually a whole project that's underway at the moment in Te Tahuha Ora, being led by Dr. Tammy Pegg, and it's looking at how we support clinicians to have these conversations more confidently. And we're working with a number of Māori communities to help us develop these resources. And at the moment, they're developing a patient empowerment tool with some questions and prompts that whānau, patients, residents can be using to help have these discussions and help make this clear for them where things are sitting as well. So watch this space. The CPR part of it is tough. That's why we're doing this extra project. We recognise there are complexities that sit with it, and we hope soon there'll be some new resources that can support people in that space and provide more education to help them feel more confident navigating these discussions.
Thank you, Jane. That's very helpful. I think of the different ways that you've explained that, the thing that sticks in my mind is that these are conversations about shared goals of care, not shared methods of care, and CPR is a method to achieve some goal or other. It's not a goal in itself. So I love that attention. Jane, thank you very much for your time and presentation today. I'd like to hand over to our colleague Margaret down there in the gorgeous deep south in Invercargill.
Thank you, Matthew. Tēnā koutou, everybody, from Mirahuku, Southland. I'm Margaret O'Connor, and I'm a nurse practitioner who's worked for many years in the aged care sector as a facility manager, older person's health nurse practitioner, and currently as a primary care provider to aged care residents with Monarch Health. It gives me great pleasure to have been involved in this project for the last 2 years and to present to you the multi-service, multidisciplinary component. For us here in Southland, this is just something that we do routinely. It's firmly embedded in our clinical practice within the aged residential care facilities. So just a little bit of background. As previously stated, the concept of these meetings in Southland came about 10 years ago, and that was through a corridor conversation with Carla and myself about how we could support clinical staff in the facilities that we worked in to work to the top of their scope. And as I said before, 10 years later, they are well embedded into what we do. We don't see them as anything special. They are what we do and how we do things to support those complex residents that we work with. They're embedded into our multi-level facilities here. So those are facilities that have all levels of care, including dementia care. And we are continuing to see the benefits from using this model. I just want to warn you that my slides are deceptively brief because, as you've seen, there's an amazing booklet and videos to refer to for finer detail. So the purpose of these meetings is to provide ultimately a coordinated approach to care for the resident, particularly the resident that we are recognising as at the end of their dementia journey and needing increased support. What happens is that those at the MDT, those residents who are presented are complex, and they are the ones that the clinical staff are concerned about or there are red flags about. And these are the residents who are presented. The MDT provides an opportunity to for all members that are involved in the care of that resident to be involved around the table. And it may be that we have different organisations coming to those meetings, like Age Concern, the Needs Assessment Service, Family, whānau, sometimes just anybody who has a direct connection to that resident who needs to be involved in the communication. To provide proactive intervention, which to upskill and educate clinical staff. You know, our staff have learnt a lot about a delirium workup, about behaviour management, about shared goals of care conversations, to the point where most often all of this, the workup necessary to present in an MDT is being done before the resident is presented at the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to have a proactive rather than a reactive approach to a resident and their presentation. It's about having timely intervention to prevent inappropriate presentations to acute care. Another purpose was to decrease the specialist staff workload. In Southland, we have very few specialist staff, and in order to widen our reach and support aged care facilities to provide care, it's important. It was important that we found a way of working where we were able to reach those people who needed it. The clinical team at the facilities are the foremost in the assessment and planning with the care, with the direction from the specialist staff now. And to facilitate a person-centred and integrated holistic approach to care that involves all of those people who are necessary for the decision making with that resident. So how to start these meetings? It's not as arduous as it seems, and it is just a matter of ticking off a few things to make sure that the meetings run appropriately. The first thing to do is to think about who needs to be on your team. Who do you need to invite? And the regulars at our meetings were always the older person's health CNS or nurse practitioner, a member of the mental health older persons group, of course the hospice nurses, nurse practitioner or CNS were there, the clinical staff of the facility, the manager was usually the facilitator, and we would bring in anybody else who needed to be involved for any particular resident who was being presented. Terms of reference are important because they give direction to how you want the meeting to run, and we've included an example in the pack for you to use. The minutes of the meeting are important as well, as is the clinical record for each resident being presented, because these provide a trail around conversations and decisions being made, and they're important to go into the resident's care, and it's a form of communication we can use for people who are not at the meeting, like the general practitioner. It's really important to think about the timing of the meetings, how often you want to have them, and what time of day suits for the clinical staff. Most of our meetings in Invercargill are on a fortnightly basis. Some have moved to monthly. It just depends on what each facility feels confident with. It is really important that meetings are restricted to 1 hour so that they don't become an arduous appointment in your diary. And as you go through, as you start your meetings and continue through, it's always important to read the minutes from the previous meeting to focus on any outcomes from the residents in the previous meeting. And it might be that you keep your resident on the agenda for a few meetings until things become resolved, and then they can be discharged off the meeting. So just to think about the outcomes pretty much of the MDT meetings. So for the people with dementia, there are many outcomes, and I think the biggest one is improved recognition of end of life. On the checklist for what we discuss with each resident, we do look at whether they have shared goals of care and what their wishes were for end of life. But it's important that we as a group recognise that the presentation that we're seeing is about whether or not their dementia journey is coming to an end. It is important that we think about whether there is anything in their presentation that is reversible, so that we can ultimately promote comfort and treat anything that is reversible. So as I spoke before, it is about the planning for end of life, and we use the shared goals of care for that to guide our interventions for that resident, but also talk about the implementation of te ara whakapuri for end-of-life care. The other thing is thinking about non-pharmacological management for our people with dementia. And it's really important that we think about things that would enhance our resident and their whānau's end-of-life journey. So the last one here we found was really important, that our residents are cared for appropriately in their home and not transferred to acute care. And we have been collecting statistics now since 2016-17 that prove very clearly that these MDT meetings and the associated things that happen with them, like shared goals of care and te ara whakapuri, have indeed increased hospital presentations here in Southland. And the big thing, of course, for people with dementia is that there is improved communication, not with them or with their legal representative, their whānau, and of course the clinical staff that are caring for them. So the benefits for ARC clinical staff is that there is there has proven to be an improved relationship with all the clinical staff, specialist staff who attend the multidisciplinary meetings. And also with the consultants that sit behind those specialist staff. It's a chance for improving skills with specialist support, the clinical staff being guided by the specialist knowledge that those nurses bring to the table. MDT meetings also provide an opportunity for debriefing or reflection around complex patients and the issues that they've had, and often how the death of that resident has been. And in the minutes of the meetings, we do record hospitalizations and reasons for hospitalization. And we also do talk about those people who have died and was there any issues with their death. So it's a good quality improvement initiative. And many of our facilities are going on to use the information that comes from these meetings to gain CIs at audit time. And also, as Jane said in her presentation, it is about minimising complaints because we have a high level of communication, and the staff, the clinical staff in the facilities are well informed and are able to discuss plans and interventions with those people who matter. So for the specialist nurses, it has the use of the meetings has absolutely promoted relationships and trust between ARC staff and specialist staff. And it means that the clinical staff at facilities feel quite comfortable in picking up the phone and discussing concerns about not just the residents presented at the meeting, but any resident that they may have concerns with. It means that specialist staff who are involved have an increased awareness of any resident that is causing concern that's been presented at the meeting, whether they have input or not. And that's decreased the workload of the specialist staff because they don't necessarily have to receive a referral to have input or influence the care and the end-of-life care of those residents. The chance to work alongside the clinical staff at the facilities to educate and empower clinical staff to manage those complex patients is really special for the clinical nurses who work in aged care. And the staff that we work with really respond to having the knowledge available to them to learn from. And also, we've noticed that the clinical staff that are at the meetings improve hugely at verbal presentation and, as I said before, preempting workup. And one of the other things that happens is that we've noticed that there's been a reduction in the duplication of services. So normally it's identified at the meeting which specialist service is most appropriate to be involved with that resident, as opposed to hospice, older persons health and mental health older persons all being involved. So it's about one person taking the lead. So that ends my my presentation, and Bevan is going to now show the video of a mock MDT.
Planning an MDT meeting takes time to organise, but it saves exponentially more time in the long run. This is a process well worth the upfront effort. Members of the meeting can attend in person or via whatever technology your facility uses, whether that be Microsoft Teams or Zoom, for example. Just use whatever technology your people are most comfortable with. To make sure the meeting runs as smoothly as possible, you can create an agenda to circulate to attendees as confirmation of the meeting and their attendance. In your MDT workbook, you will find a copy of a template for an MDT agenda that you can use to make things a bit easier. Make sure to add a list of other team members that you think will be valuable in these discussions. For example, the general practitioner, a practice nurse, any Māori health providers that are involved, psychologists, physiotherapists, and district nurses. Just remember that a team member may join only for one specific case, hence the importance of making sure that your meeting runs to its schedule.
Good morning. Thank you for coming to our fortnightly multidisciplinary meeting. For the minutes, can we please go around the table and introduce yourself and your role?
Hi, I'm Joy, registered nurse, clinical manager at P7.
I'm Lisa, nurse practitioner from hospice.
I'm Bronwyn, registered nurse for mental health older persons.
Margaret, nurse practitioner from older persons health.
Julie, registered nurse, clinical manager for dementia services here at P7.
And I'm Renette, registered nurse, facility manager of P7 Village. Thank you for that.
Before the meeting starts, it is essential that you confirm the aged residential care registered nurse who scheduled the case for review presents a summary to everyone. The registered nurse will have assessed the person and needs to arrive prepared to answer questions from the other team members. The registered nurse can use the following template in their preparations. This template can also be found in the MDT workbook.
Do you have any matters arising from the residents previously discussed?
No.
Okay. Good. Today, Julie will present one of her gentlemen in the dementia unit. Julie.
Thank you. So today I'm going to present John Doe. He's one of my gentlemen. He's 84 years old, married, and has a very supportive family. He was a dairy farmer, has a medical history of osteoarthritis in his knees, chronic heart failure, and advanced dementia. The heart failure results in his left lower leg often having +1 pitting edema. He has compression socks but often takes them off. The osteoarthritis can lead to bouts of restlessness and aggression, and due to him being a past farmer, he feels the need to be on the go most of the time, day and night. He's now sleeping more during the day, as well as the night, and becoming increasingly weak. Some days he's having 8 falls. He's having difficulty taking his oral medications now due to problems with his swallowing. This is also worse when he's tired.
There is a checklist on the second page of your MDT summary sheet that you can find in the MDT workbook. This checklist will help ensure that all the required discussion points you want to cover are included in your meeting.
He's been given the PRN morphine elixir as needed for pain, but we're worried about his deterioration and his difficulty in taking his oral medications, and this might be contributing to an increase in restlessness, aggression and his falls.
Yeah, for 8 falls in a day is a lot, isn't it, Julie? Shall we just see if we've got an underlying delirium at all for this man? So he's not constipated,
no.
And so he hasn't had, he last had a urine culture done back in May of last year, so he's not prone to urine infections.
No.
And his bloods, his thyroid's okay, renal function's okay, liver function's okay.
Check any radiology scan results to see if there is anything from these that might be contributing to symptoms.
Is there any recent radiology, any x-rays or scans?
I don't think he's had anything done since he's been in the unit. I think all the scans and x-rays and things were done prior to him coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, the last one's on here is 2015, so yeah. Are you thinking from an osteoarthritis point of view?
Yeah, you say his knees are painful, that's where he feels it most, and I gather that's, is there anything else indicated on the...
No, these are both abdomens.
Oh, okay, that's very helpful.
Julie, just in regards to his food and fluid, and he's a man that's on the move, obviously, how is his actual appetite? You know, what is it that you can do to help him with that?
Well, he's actually lost 6 kilograms this month. He's gone down from 58 to 52, and that's because he's too busy, because when he was on the farm, he was always busy.
Yeah.
We can get him to sit down and eat a good breakfast, but we just have to keep snacks ready for him on the go when he's busy.
Yeah.
He does drink well, though.
Great. Well, that's perfect. What about his teeth? You know, because we know that sometimes they can't identify that they've got tooth pain and it is something that's easily missed. So his own teeth?
Yeah, he's got his own teeth, and he was seen by the mobile dental clinic in February.
Oh, okay.
They had no concerns.
Right, perfect. Okay, that's great.
Check the person's OBS records and see if there is any indication as to what might be causing some symptoms. Consider what side effects might be arising because of the person's medication. For example, is their blood pressure medication leading to an increase in confusion? Small changes can have surprisingly large impacts.
What's his OBS like?
His latest OBS, his temperature is 36.8, heart rate 72 irregular, rest rate 22, SpO2 96 on room air, blood pressure 96/62, and BGL 4.8.
Oh, his blood pressure's a bit of a concern, isn't it? He's quite hypotensive.
Consider whether or not the person has any unmanaged pain. Pain that is being missed may lead to increased aggression. Also, it would pay to ask, are there any non-pharmacological interventions that could help?
Yeah. And I was just going to ask a bit more about the pain too, Julie. So you're using, what pain measures are you using? The pain aid or pain still? Okay, yeah. And how's he rating?
About 4 out of 5.
Okay. And he's got PRN morphine elixir, and how much is he using and how often?
2.5 milligrams every 2 to 3 hours.
Okay, and is that helping?
Not really.
Okay, and his pain is where? In his
knees and his legs.
Okay, and is there any times it's worse than others?
When he's moving around.
Okay, right.
Yeah, have you got physio assessment for his mobility and falls?
No, but I can put a referral through.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
that'd be good.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking with the morphine, it might be quite good to maybe use a 5 milligram dose. You've got it charted 2.5 to 5, so if 2.5 is not working, maybe 5.
Okay.
And using it a bit more regularly, especially the times where he, during the day, if he's moving around more. Okay. And we could have a look at that with you, give it a couple of days and see how much he's needing. Maybe look at introducing a long-acting pain relief, like a Meslon.
Great, thank you.
Given all that you have discussed, it might be time to start considering whether the person is in terminal delirium or suffering from restlessness. Consider the following when identifying that a person is in the final phase of their dementia journey. A person may develop distress, perhaps as a result of hallucinations or misinterpretations. The person may be restless, grabbing at things or picking at things. The person may find it harder to comprehend even just one-word instructions. Try to identify what their unmet need is. It is important to consider person-centered options like music they know, or weighted animals, or something comforting like a hand massage or a foot massage. Think about what the person's history is and how that can be incorporated into their current needs. The gentleman discussed in the video clip was a farmer, so he may still want to walk if possible and might need extra assistance to do this. Provide regular input to address changing needs. The person may benefit from people sitting next to them, especially family and whānau. Are there wairua or religious needs that need to be accounted for? Support the family with some of these suggestions so they can provide the support. This final stage may occur for a number of weeks before the person enters their very final dying stage.
It certainly sounds like he's deteriorating, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there any cultural or spiritual needs for this man, Julie?
No, the family seem to take care of all of his spiritual and cultural needs.
Yeah.
And also, just on that with his family, his enduring power of attorney will be activated.
Yes.
And the wife holds that.
Yes.
That's great. So just keeping her involved with all of this is great as well, or important anyway.
Preemptive mechanisms for comfort means that the aged residential care facility can plan to have medications ready when needed. Work with your GP and the Te Aka Whakapiri prescribing guidelines to organise these mechanisms.
Yeah. Has he got a shared goals of care done, Julie?
Yes, he does.
Okay, and what does that say?
Comfort cares only, and only transferred to hospital if necessary.
Okay. Like if he fractures, you mean?
If we suspected a fracture, yes,
Yeah.
but to consult the wife first.
Yeah. And that was done when?
Done on admission, but it's reviewed every 3 months with the GP and the wife.
Okay.
So it's still current.
Yeah.
It's good
to know.
It just sounds very much like this man is nearing the end of his dementia journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think we all need to be mindful in supporting family and staff to manage.
Because dementia is a palliative condition, people do die at the end stage of dementia. So it's important to recognise that and maybe have some plans in place. So, the fact that he is getting more frail in time and starting to have difficulty with medications at times too, it might be quite helpful to have some preemptive subcutaneous medications in place for comfort if needed in the future as well. And you could maybe work with the GP around that and use Te Ara Whakapiri with the prescribing guidelines to help guide prescribing as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At the end of the meeting, the aged residential care registered nurse will sum everything up and record the information in the MDT summary sheet. Like the other forms that have been presented here, you can find a template of this summary sheet in your MDT workbook. There should be 3 copies of the MDT summary sheet. One for the person's file, one for the person's GP, and one for whānau to facilitate further discussion.
Yeah. I want to sum up, right?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Sounds like Mr. John Doe has a progression of dementia journey and is approaching end of life. So just to sum up and just to clarify, Julie will do a referral to the GP to do a blood test, MSTU, review long-acting pain for our long-acting pain relief. Review his furosemide and candesartan, review his antipsychotics, the risperidone and escitalopram, and we'll do a referral to the physio regarding fall and decreased mobility. We'll also do a 3-day, twice-a-day blood pressure monitoring, and we'll invite the family to the next MDT meeting so they are fully informed and have the opportunity to discuss the whakapiri if needed. Yeah. Is that
You're going to discuss with Dr. Ellen too?
Absolutely, yeah, the risperidone and the escitalopram.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to add, Julie?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your input and care to Mr. John Doe. We'll meet again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Just thank you very much, Margaret, for introducing us to that second part of the suite of tools that are being promoted here. Obviously, the attention in much of what you said was mainly on how the interdisciplinary meeting could work in an aged residential care setting. What are your thoughts about those people who might be approaching the end of their life with dementia but are actually living at home? We know that that's not the majority, but it's in a very important group. How do you think this kind of meeting approach could lend itself to that kind of community care setting, home care setting?
That's a really good question, Matthew, and it was one I had a few years ago, to the point where we did run a pilot study using a local healthcare agency, and exactly in the same format around identifying and bringing their complex patients that they were concerned about, and a specialist team helping them to assess and plan interventions to promote a better quality of life and end of life. So I know that this MDT format would work perfectly well in a community group as well.
I guess what we've already got is the capacity to refer under palliative care funding to one of the home care providers. We've also got the capacity to refer to older person's mental health to bring in their dementia expertise, or to older person's health. We've already got the possibility of referring to hospice for their community nursing advice and medical advice. So you're just talking about knitting them all together in a purposeful way, I guess. Is that the essence of this idea?
Yes, absolutely. And for the community project, we also used the local needs assessment service coordination. They were a big player as well, because they were in providing extra care or tailoring the care to meet the person's needs.
Got it. All right, well, thank you very much, Margaret. We'll hand over to our colleague Vicky now to take us through the third and final part of these three tools and how they match together.
Thank you, Matthew. So, kia ora everyone, I'm Vicky Telford. I work at Nurse Maud Hospice Services with a couple of roles, and as I get to the end of my nursing career, I can say I've reached the pinnacle of working alongside residential care colleagues in the delivery of palliative and end-of-life care. So as Te Ara Whakapiri facilitator, I started that role with the Liverpool Care Pathway in 2009, and it's now morphed into Te Ara Whakapiri with the same intent to enable end-of-life care to be as good as it possibly can be. My other role, I work in a park service, which is a palliative age residential care service. And that is a 7-day-a-week service working alongside age residential care, including dementia facilities, in the delivery of palliative and end-of-life care. Very privileged. So, Te Ara Whakapiri is the last piece of the puzzle today, really, and in some ways the easiest if shared goals of care and the MDT have been completed. Person and family are prepared, conversations have taken place, wishes are known and documented. However, there will always be the potential for complexity in the dying time, and Te Ara Whakapiri is a tool that can assist. The unifying path, bringing people together, working together. So a multidisciplinary approach to best practice for the last hours and days of life for people with a life-limiting illness, including dementia. It's used in a variety of settings, including home, hospital, hospice, and aged residential care. The document itself was first published in 2017 and is available on the Ministry's website. A review and changes were made to the original plan in 2020, and this version is used throughout the South Island and parts of the North Island and is available to be downloaded on Health Pathways. Why? Regardless of which version we use, the intent is the same: to use the Te Whara Tapawhā universal principles as a framework to guide and individualise care. It's a palliative approach which supports quality of living, and now it's changing its focus to quality of dying. Which comes down to diagnosing dying, and recognition of a transition to the last days of life can be challenging, and especially in people with dementia, who are often on this slow decline for a number of months. This next slide is one that I use often, and it just helps put things in perspective. So on the outer circle, we're looking at anybody living with a life-limiting illness, like dementia. Time frame looking last months to years of life, with a focus on improving and encouraging quality of living, looking at early symptom management, starting the conversations that are so important to make things better in the last hours and days of life. If we do it in a timely manner, then we usually get it right. Introduction of a palliative approach and palliative care services at this time. And then looking at the last weeks to months of life. So declining function, goals of care may fluctuate, may need to be revisited. And then looking at quality of dying in the last days of life. Te ara whakapiri, the use of, looking at active pain and symptom management, anticipatory prescribing, conversations with the family, etc. So, pre-active dying can come under the general deterioration list there of profound weakness, reduced food and fluid intake, difficulty swallowing, mostly bedbound. And then getting closer to the dying time, active dying, increased drowsiness, reduced level of consciousness, sometimes terminal restlessness, increased cyanosis and mottling of lips, fingers, can be respiratory changes like chain stroke breathing or ataxic breathing. There is always uncertainty around when death will occur, but people dying with dementia mostly present, as the slides show, they settle into dying. It's a situation of a deteriorating body catching up with a deteriorated brain. Time frame can be challenging and an often asked question: how long? It is a very brave person who gives predictions. The dying time can be quite prolonged in people with dementia, and so predictions are always tricky. Also remembering that a person with dementia may well have other diseases, such as chronic illness or cancer, which will influence the dying time. And sometimes people die suddenly, and sometimes people recover from dying. The how. So when the multidisciplinary team, in consultation with the person, if able, and the family whānau, agree this is likely to be the last hours and days of life, te ara whakapiri is commenced. The goals of care for the baseline assessment and ongoing assessment are listed under the Te Whara Tapawhā model, ensuring that not only the physical needs of the dying person are addressed, but also the spiritual, emotional, mental, cultural needs, and also the needs of the family. So this is the 2020 revised document, somewhat different to the Liverpool Care Pathway, which was 13 pages long. However, as I mentioned before, the intent is the same, to make this dying time as good as it can be for the person and for the family. We'll discuss more of the goals in the slides coming up. And this is the ongoing assessment, which is used for both versions. So are the goals listed being achieved? What interventions have been required to meet these goals? Has there been a need to seek extra help to achieve optimum outcomes?
The cares. Yeah, assisting them with personal hygiene.
Okay, so breaking down into the goals. So Tinana, physical well-being. So we need to assess the physical needs at this dying time. Is the person in pain? Are they restless? And put strategies in place to manage. Review current medications. Often people are unconscious at this time and oral medications aren't an issue. But if they are still able to swallow, we need to have the medications reviewed and any that are unnecessary at this time stopped. And interventions, looking at interventions. Do we need to be doing vital signs when somebody's actively dying? I suggest not. How often should we be doing a position change when somebody's actively dying? I've been around a long time. In my day, we turned everybody to Ali. That's what I was trained to do. With the use of Te Ara Whakapiri, that practice has changed somewhat. And the ongoing assessment makes us do a skin integrity check, which will inform us on how often we need to be doing a position change. So basically, I'm talking about individualizing care here. An often asked question is around bowel management when somebody's actively dying. If somebody hasn't had their bowels open for 4 or 5 days, should we be doing something? And the answer is, if they're not symptomatic, probably not. The next thing that will make life easier all round is anticipatory prescribing. And when I'm talking about anticipatory prescribing, I'm meaning subcutaneous PRN medications for 5 symptoms that might occur when somebody's dying. So that's pain, terminal restlessness, respiratory tract secretions, nausea and vomiting, and breathlessness. Now, people will die with some of these, maybe none of them. Best practice is we have medications available to manage. That means the person's not waiting while we get things prescribed, etc. So it is best practice. If somebody was already on an opioid, we would go straight to a syringe driver, because if they're unable to swallow, we need to be able to give those medications. However, best practice is to titrate using PRN subcut until we get somebody to steady state for something like pain management. Morphine is sometimes a bit of a bad word for people and it has a bad name that it might be hastening death. We often need to have a conversation with family. Actually, morphine will not hasten death. It's actually a means to keep somebody comfortable. That person is dying, but not from the medication. Terminal restlessness may or may not occur, not to be confused with normal restlessness that can occur. I had the privilege of attending a session with some dementia care staff, and they were talking about some of the residents and how they died. And one of the care staff mentioned a woman who didn't normally do this, but on the day she died, she was calling out to her mum. Not something we would need to be using medications to control, a normal part of her dying process. However, if there is terminal restlessness, there are medication guidelines available, whether that be midazolam or clonazepam, etc. Respiratory tract secretions, another issue for families. And it's a conversation we need to have to reassure them that it's far worse for them listening to that than it is for the person who's actually actively dying. The use of oxygen for breathlessness, do we use that? Tend not to, because it's a bit of a barrier in terms of a mask or nasal prongs. And we know a small dose of morphine will help settle that breathlessness. But it's not all about medications. So in the symptom management guidelines that can be downloaded locally on Health Pathways and also on the ministry's website, there are non-pharmacological guidelines as important as pharmacological guidelines. And just before we leave medications, there is a sublingual option for those 5 symptoms that can be used as successfully as subcutaneous. And the guidelines for sublingual management are being updated at the moment and will be available on the Hospice New Zealand website. The provision of food and fluids is often a very tricky area for families, and I think particularly with dementia. So often families visit and help their loved ones with their food and fluids because it's something they can do. And when people stop eating and drinking, which is a normal part of the dying process, it can be a struggle for the family and requires the conversation around, actually, they're not hungry, they're not thirsty, and let's maybe start doing beautiful mouth cares. If there's any complex needs happening, then specialist palliative care should be approached. So there's measurable practice improvements from what's happened with the introduction of an end-of-life care plan around anticipatory prescribing is now commonplace. Stopping unnecessary medications is commonplace. But more importantly, there's evidence that the important conversations are taking place and being documented. Pininaro, mental well-being. Is there an ACP in place? Has there been a shared goals of care conversation? What is the person's voice? What is important to them? What are the person's current mental state and their coping strategies? The hawhānau, family social well-being. Ensure that the family and whānau are aware of the person's changing condition, having that conversation. Discuss family customs and traditions and cultural needs. Provide information to the family, for example, understanding the dying process. And there's a wonderful resource that's been put together by the New Zealand Dementia Foundation that's available on the website for families. Identify any communication barriers. Consider involving an interpreter if required. Wairua, spiritual well-being. Provide an opportunity for the person, if able, in the family whānau to discuss what is important to them, particularly cultural and spiritual beliefs or practices. What do we know about the person dying? What was important to them? What is important to them? Is it music, pets, religious beliefs? Incorporate these factors into the care plan where possible, or coordinate access to specialised cultural or spiritual support. So in summary, the baseline assessment provides a comprehensive overview of individualised care going forward, and the ongoing assessment gives a snapshot of whether the goals are being met. It is important to continue with the clinical or progress notes to provide a narrative of the dying time, a source of rich information. Documentation of the plan of care is completed by a registered health professional. The non-regulated workforce are often the main providers of the care, and their input and documentation is vital for an MDT approach to care. So preparation and care after death. There's no rush, there's no rules. family whānau should be provided with practical advice on what to do when death occurs. Do they know about funeral planning? Is there a brochure available around that? Do we provide a list of funeral directors, etc.? Preferences for after death are identified and documented. Cultural beliefs and wishes are identified and documented. And then for bereavement support. So grief for the family whānau of someone with dementia can be a unique experience. Loss, like for the person, is from diagnosis through to death and after. The following are a few thoughts from when my mum journeyed through dementia. The realization that she didn't know me anymore, that she didn't speak anymore, that she didn't smile anymore, and numerous other losses. And then after she died, the sense of relief and associated guilt with that. The frustration and sadness of recollection of the dementia process and the inability to recall what an intelligent, beautiful woman she had been before. I suspect my experience is not uncommon. Mostly all of that will resolve, but some people will require extra help. So the resources, the one on the left, Te Ara Whakapiri, Principles and Guidance for the Last Days of Life, was published in 2015, and it gives an overview for what adult New Zealanders should expect to receive in the last 1,000 days of life, best practice. The one on the right, published in 2017, has some wonderful resources, including a bereavement assessment tool, an algorithm around diagnosing dying, guidance for the medical team around management planning, looking at when death approaches, and also dying at home. The pièce de résistance. These resources are superbly compiled and include wonderful sections on staff support, which we aren't covering in this session today, but so important, and also supporting other residents through grief. These resources will definitely provide a very valuable guide for best practice for end-of-life care for people with dementia, and I know that I look forward to adding them to my armoury. Thank you.
Kia ora, Vicky. Thank you very, very much for the personal side of your story, as well as that wealth of experience. Just no one has yet put in a specific question, but so please do, folks, because there's time, and not just for Vicky's presentation, but any questions that you think would be of general interest, as well as your own interest in relation to this topic. What I'd like to ask you, Vicky, is if I'm sitting in an aged residential care setting as say a lead nurse, or I'm sitting in a home-based support service setting, or even in a Te Whatuora hospital or clinical team setting, and I realise that my team doesn't really understand Te Ara Whakapiri, we don't know about it, we're not experienced with it, who can I reach out to upskill our team with its knowledge and its understanding of Te Ara Whakapiri? What are my options?
So I can talk definitely for Canterbury. So I think I'm the only dedicated facilitator left in New Zealand from Liverpool Care Pathway days. So I'm funded for that role, which includes me going into 97 facilities, educating 100% of RNs and also about 80% of the care staff. I also do education for the district providers in Canterbury as well. And in the acute setting, the palliative care team is responsible for educating. And we know that Te Ara Whakapiri is used very widely in the acute setting at Christchurch Public and also here. I would suspect from other areas that the park service that I'm part of would have quite a significant role in educating around Te Ara Whakapiri, and the girls from Southland, I'm sure, can answer that in the positive. And I know in Wellington there's a similar service through the hospice service and also in Auckland, the hospice services. So yes, there will be education provided. There is access, as there is online, of course.
Right. So besides the online side of things, we're also thinking about through the hospice network, we might, if they themselves don't run education, they might know who does. Can you clarify for folks a little bit, Vicky, for those that may have missed it, what is the equivalent of Te Ara Whakapiri for those parts of the country that are not using that particular version or that particular tool that we've been showcasing today?
Okay, so the 2020 version that I did show was put together with a group from Siapo. And the reason that was put together was we did audit of the original 2017 document and found that in that it wasn't being completed as well as it needed to be. So we made some changes. So the 2017 document has a care after death section. It was not being completed really. So in our 2020, we put preparation for care after death. So we were having that conversation. So that's been rolled out South Island wide, and I field interest recently from VHB in Wellington are using it. Parts of Auckland are using it. The rest of the country will be using the 2017 document. And as I said in the presentation, really it doesn't matter which one you use. Basically, it's about best practice in the last hours and days of life, and both tools, both versions will meet that need.
Thinking of all our speakers today, what is your advice to someone who's sitting listening and going, I get it. I get that shared goals of care, and even if I'm not living, working in aged residential care, the serious conversation guide and thinking about advanced care planning, I get it. I get that would be a real step forward for us. Someone else is sitting listening saying, I get that trying to get an interdisciplinary team meeting going either regularly or as needed for specific clients, I get it. Someone else is saying, I get that Te Ara Whakapiri is a real step forward and we haven't been doing that. What are your thoughts about the next steps for listeners today who can see that this would be great, but are feeling a little bit daunted by, we've got these 3 tools and we might not be using any, or we might be just using one so far. What would the 3 of our speakers today say in the sort of how to take the next step forward?
I don't know, as first shall I kick off? I would say the next step probably is to access the amazing resources that have been compiled by Dementia New Zealand in the space. The whole reason for this webinar today is to share that. And they're an amazing resource, not only because they walk you step by step through the processes, but they also provide you with amazing links to resources and education that you can access. And a lot of that is available online, so that some of those things you can do self-directed learning in those spaces and understand some of that. Within my sphere of sort of the Shared Goals of Care serious illness conversation, we have trainers throughout the country that are working predominantly based with some of the Te Tahuha audit teams, but often they're opening access to other staff that come from other sectors. So if you're wanting to do some practical training around some of those communication tools, there are opportunities to get in touch with your local teams and look at what might be available as in-person training in those spaces as well in your district. Kia ora.
Thank you, Jane. Any thoughts, Margaret, in response to that issue?
I think that if you can see the need for this within your facility or your organisation, make it a quality initiative to implement these 3 tools. I mean, absolutely, Jane's correct. Start by looking at the tools. There are lots of people who are available to help you implement them, and for the MDT, there are some of us in Southland who are happy to virtual in and give guidance. You can contact us through the New Zealand Dementia Foundation.
Thanks, Margaret. Vicky, what are your comments about the how to go the next step forward?
Sure. So a wish list and something that will happen. So I'll start with the wish list, which has always been an online education tool about Te Ara Whakapiri. The actual, not what we've done today, but more about how do you complete the ongoing assessment and so on and so forth. That doesn't exist at the moment, and I think before I retire, it will. The other thing that is going to happen about the 3 tools is I've been on a little end-of-life working group, and Jane Large has requested that, you know, could the 3 tools go further than the Dementia Foundation website, and I'm really pleased to say that they will sit on the Hospice New Zealand website, which has a hub which all health professionals can go to. So it will be part of an education. This webinar will be part of education there. So that's getting the word out there. So yeah, that's all I really have to offer.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much to the 3 of you for just introducing us or reintroducing us to those 3 tools, but thinking of them as a package together so that we can help our whānau and our people that are dying with dementia, not necessarily from it, but with dementia. So folks, a recording of today's network meeting will be available on the New Zealand Dementia Foundation website, as always, under the Dementia Mate Wareware network page there. If you're ever trying to find these resources and you've forgotten how, it's pretty easy. If you just type whatever you remember of the name of them into Google, you will find them. But if I just share my screen with you, I'm just going to show you where these things fit. If you type in nzdementia.org, you'll be taken to the New Zealand Dementia Foundation website. This is just to remind you, it's different from Dementia New Zealand and Alzheimer's New Zealand's websites, which are really focusing on service delivery to people living with dementia. What the Dementia Foundation is about is helping the workforce to do its best work. And you can search on here. If you can't remember how to navigate through the site, it's very intuitive, but if you just type in 3 tools into the search engine, you will find right at the top, end of life, 3 tools. And here they are. So everything that we've been talking about today, with all of the resources, explanatory videos, teaching material, things that you can download and print, it's all there. So I commend that to you. Thank you very much to our team today that have enabled this meeting to go very smoothly, and apologies to those of you who, for bandwidth issues or whatever reason, found the sound just a bit tricky at times, but do go back and have a look at the videos. Our karakia to finish off today is one that simply asks us all to take a breath, to think about what we've learned, and uses the metaphor, great South Island metaphor, of the greenstone sea, the calm sea that carries us on out into the day. So kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa punamu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroa atu, aroa mai. Tātou I a tātou katoa. Hui e, taiki e. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Thank you for being part of today's session. How wonderful it was to see literally hundreds of people gathered together. We have one network meeting left this year on the 16th of November, same time, same channel, and the information about what it is that the Dementia Leadership and Advisory Group feel will be the most important educational and team building exercise for our last network will be coming out shortly to a place near you. So thank you very much to the Dementia Foundation team who've pulled this together for us today, and huge respect to our South Island colleagues who've developed this resource for the benefit of the whole country. We so appreciate the work that you've done. Hakite, see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.